Hello, beautiful people. I'm Kimberly Dark, as many of you know, and I'm a writer and sociologist and storyteller, and I have some simple answers for you about questions on social inequality. And these questions come from you or people like you. And so if you have questions for things to handle here once a month, I'm happy to do it. You can be in touch by social media or however else you're in touch with me. I don't know. I want to just remind you that I don't have all the answers. I don't even have the only right answers, but I will spend up to an hour with you each week doing what I can to address a few issues. And probably, I think we've got a short one today. I think it won't take very long, but feel free to ask and discuss as many things as you want to once we get there. Why are we doing this? Wow. It's because in my mind, it is hopeful if more people feel like they know enough about basic issues to be able to join public discourse about them. And let's face it, there's a lot of things that are happening. And so I'm not here to offer you in-depth scholarship about these issues. In many cases, there are scholars that are better prepared to do that than I am. I'm always going to offer you a few resources, though, and I'm going to offer you a sociological perspective because that can sometimes be helpful as well. As usual, thank you to Emily for facilitating, and feel free to use the chat box as well as we go along. This is why I have water handy. All right, friends, we're going to talk about two things today. Two very different things. Sometimes I try and get these topics to be sort of similar, but in this case, they are not. The first one is redistricting. This is a thing that's happening right now, and I'm just going to jump in. Listen, every time there is a U.S. census, which is every 10 years, the government goes through a process of redistricting. And it makes total sense. You know, it's like it's in the Constitution that we do this because the population of the country changes. Well, check it out. It changes in a lot of ways, but here's a big one. The U.S. is becoming less white. And, you know, some people are freaked out about it. Some people are happy about it, but this is part of what's happening. And so in addition to talking about redistricting, which is based on the U.S. Census, we also have to talk about gerrymandering. Now, I've talked about gerrymandering here before, and, you know, it's a good topic, right? But I'm going to, play a little video for you in just a minute about this. But so redistricting itself is the process of drawing the lines of districts from which public officials are elected. So when this happens fairly, it becomes an accurate representation of population changes and racial diversity, and it's used to allocate representation in Congress and state legislatures. The thing is, though, there's this thing called gerrymandering where folks try to fiddle with the way those lines are drawn to manipulate the outcome of elections. So this is a process that undermines democracy. It stifles the voice of voters. It is legal, and both political parties do it. And so there's a message here that I would like to make you aware of. I'm often not trying to tell you what to do about these issues, but in this case, it is important to find out how does your state do this redistricting process, and just let your elected officials know, hey, I care about fairness. I care about not gerrymandering. And why is it important to do that? I mean, it seems like we should care about fairness, just period. But if you think about the history of the United States and our current political practice, fairness is not actually one of our cultural values. And so we have to keep reminding the people who are elected that that this is something that we care about. So it should be a simple thing. It's not. Depending on where you live, there are state legislature does redistricting in 15 different states. There are, in some states, special redistricting commissions or advisory groups if the legislature fails. So this is already on the mind of people, like how do we achieve fairness or how do we achieve superiority is already on the mind of people. And, it helps to get your voice into that that situation. So Emily, if you wouldn't mind playing the video on gerrymandering. This is like a 2-minute video, but it is from the Washington Post, and it is so succinct. It's not new, but it's so clear about what gerrymandering is. And then once the video is playing, Emily, you can offer the people the articles, just all of the articles that I prepared for you all today.
Here we go.
Thank you.
So, you want to know what gerrymandering is? First, let's start with Government 101. In the United States, each state elects a certain number of representatives based on the state's population. The larger your population, the more representatives you have. Each representative represents a district, or a geographical area including its voters. Ideally, we want to have a range of representatives who reflect the political views of the population across the state. But how do we decide who gets to vote for each representative? Let's look at an example. Suppose we have a very tiny state of 50 people. 30 of them belong to the blue party, and 20 belong to the red party. And just our luck, they all live in a nice even grid with blues on one side of the state and reds on the other. Now, let's say we need to divide the state into 5 districts. Each district will send one representative to the House to represent the people.
Emily?
Fortunately, because our citizens live in a neatly ordered grid, it's easy to draw 5 lengthy districts, 2 for the reds and 3 for the blues. Voila! Perfectly proportional representation.
Hey, I'm not sure that everybody is seeing, on my end at least, the video is not tracking with the words. Is that happening for others?
Feel free to unmute yourselves and let me know if there's a issue.
It wasn't for a while, and then right when you spoke up, and I think Emily switched back to the tab, it caught back up to itself, but the story hadn't followed.
All right, let me start over, okay?
Yeah, let's try start over once. If it doesn't go, we're gonna just let it go through, and you've got to pay closer attention. But the pictures really are important in this.
Okay. Let's try that again.
These are the challenges of the internet.
Sharing screen. This Firefox. All right. And let's try that again.
So, you want to know what gerrymandering is? First, let's start with Government 101. In the United States, each state elects a certain number of representatives based on the state's population. The larger your population, the more representatives you have. Each representative represents a district, or a geographical area including its voters. Ideally, we want to have a range of representatives who reflect the political views of the population across the state. But how do we decide who gets to vote for each representative? Let's look at an example. Suppose we have a very tiny state of 50 people. 30 of them belong to the blue party, and 20 belong to the red party. And just our luck, they all live in a nice even grid with blues on one side of the state and reds on the other. Now, let's say we need to divide the state into 5 districts. Each district will send one representative to the House to represent the people. Fortunately, because our citizens live in a neatly ordered grid, it's easy to draw 5 lengthy districts, 2 for the reds and 3 for the blues. Voila! Perfectly proportional representation, just as the founders intended. Now, let's say instead that the blue party controls the state government, and they get to decide how the lines are drawn. Rather than draw districts horizontally, they draw them vertically, so that in each district there are 6 blues and 4 reds. With a comfortable blue majority in the state, each district elects a blue candidate to the House. The blues win 5 seats, and the reds don't get a single one. Oh well, finally, what if the red party controls the state government? The reds know they're at a numerical disadvantage. But with some creative boundary drawing, they can slice the blue population up such that they only get a majority in 2 districts. So despite making up 40% of the population, the reds win 60% of the seats. Not bad. This process of redrawing district lines to give an advantage to one party over another is called gerrymandering, and it's nothing new. The term gerrymander is named after early 19th century Massachusetts Governor Elbridge Gerry, who redrew the map of the Senate's districts in 1810 in order to weaken the opposing Federalist Party. Our example is, of course, a huge simplification. In the real world, people don't live in neatly ordered grids sorted by political party. But for politicians looking to give themselves an advantage at redistricting time, the process is exactly the same, and the consequences are very real. Gerrymandering is at least partly to blame for lopsided representation in the House seen in recent elections, and, it's been argued by the president, for political polarization, since representatives don't have to compromise hardline views in order to win seats.
There you have it, my friends. Did you see at the very end there some of the way that those districts can be drawn to include only people who are going to be supportive of a certain candidate? So this is, it's a really radical situation when you think about how gerrymandering happens for Republicans, for Democrats. I mean, it's like both sides are trying to, like, you can see that it's a form of cheating, right? But it's like both sides are trying to cheat as much as possible, as opposed to trying to make the system as fair as possible. And that is the problem that we want to be able to eliminate as people who, live in these states. So check it out. I am giving you some articles that you can understand more about redistricting. Here's the important thing about redistricting. The Constitution requires it. It is a good thing. It happens every 10 years. This is why it's so important that the census try to reach every person that is living in that area so that they're represented. So there's nothing weird or like political about redistricting. It is a normal thing that happens as the population changes. Gerrymandering is not a normal thing. It is a legal way to cheat that, we've got to figure out how to bring, because listen, here's the thing about it. It's not like you can say, well, you can't do that anymore, because somebody has to draw these boundaries, right? And it's easy to say, well, you just do it like a grid, except for population is not evenly distributed, right? So this is not like it's an easy thing to fix, even though gerrymandering is totally an unfair way to give one party or the other advantage. So I've given you a couple of articles. The one from Yes Magazine, there's one from Yes Magazine that specifically talks to how reparations will help with school equity. And yes, that does end up relating to gerrymandering as well. But particularly if you happen to be in my sociology of education class, I expect you to comment on that article. But hopefully you enjoy those articles and you learn more, and that you are able to talk to others about what is redistricting and what is gerrymandering. Does anyone already have in mind somewhere they want to talk about redistricting or the census or gerrymandering? Because this is always a question that I ask you all. If we plan to have these conversations, we're more likely to do it. So if you have an idea already about where you might talk about these things, unmute yourself and let us know. Now is when I want music to play, where there's like the Jeopardy theme or something. So I can let like 90 seconds pass comfortably without talking over you, but it's okay. I just want you to think about it. So I'm going to move on to the next question. So here's how this question actually came up. Why is it so hard for thin men to date fat women? It's a good question. And you know what? My mind almost wanted to mess with it so that I could get a broader theme out of it. And I want you to know, sometimes I do that. Sometimes a question comes forward in such a way where I think, wow, if I broaden this just a little bit, it'll be a better conversation, a better way to answer the question. But I had to stop myself in this situation, because I want to talk about fat stigma, and that doesn't have anything to do with the gender of the people involved. But there is another element to this question where gender is absolutely salient. So let's talk about it as it is presented. So check it out. Just going broadly first, right? Fat people are stigmatized in the United States. Generally, I'm going to say we because, you know, I don't know how much of me you can see, but maybe you already know I am a fat person. By the way, I'm using fat as a neutral descriptive term like blonde or old or deaf, which I think is important to do in reference to ourselves, right? Because it's often an insult word. You shouldn't go around calling other people fat until they've given you permission to do so. But fat is generally considered bad. And you might think, well, but I don't believe that. Not everybody believes that. Okay, bravo. And all you need to do is look at cultural representations of fat people in order to understand that fat people are still, to this day, generally thought to be stupid and ugly and lazy and gluttonous and above all, like responsible for all of the terrible things that might happen to them, because of course those would result from being fat. So this is what it means to have a stigmatized identity, that in a passive way, an unconscious way, people treat you as less than. They don't want to date you. They want to pay you less money. They don't want to hire you in the first place. You know, all of these kinds of things. So that's happening out here in the world. This is important to understand because the reason that it is difficult to associate with fat people, whether it's someone in your family, whether it's a friend, whether it's a colleague, whether it is your spouse or someone you're dating, is because stigma is contagious. Now, I don't know if you've noticed this in other ways, but stigma travels. It travels from one person to the next. And as soon as you are friends with somebody who has what Irving Goffman would have described as a spoiled identity, I actually love that term. So, you know, it's like spoiling like fruit, right? If everyone does not think well of a person, they have a spoiled identity. So if you claim to like or love that person with a spoiled identity, people will look at you and start to wonder, what is wrong with you too? So this is especially true if that person is your lover. Because first of all, being sexually and romantically involved with another human being, it causes us to notice the body. It causes us to remember, oh, right, we're not just heads walking around with opinions, which is how, you know, a lot of times we live our lives. We are actually humans with bodies. And it causes other people to look at that person and go, oh, you actually are attracted to that person. You are intimate with that person's body. That person has flaws, and I'll bet you do too. Oh. Now, here's what's even more radical, is if people think you love that flawed body, that you actually love that person who is so widely hated in the culture. Now, fatness is not the only thing with which this happens, right? Do you know that term, somebody is dating out of their league? You know, basically that means all bodies line up in a hierarchy of worth according to the culture. And if you are out of your league, you're dating lower than you or higher than you, there's some kind of problem, because, you know, we expect people to basically date others with similar social worth. I mean, this is a freak show when you actually start to think it through, right? The social expectations we have about how people love one another or date or fall in love or, you know, whatever the thing might be. Okay, I want to go back to the original question itself. Why is it so hard for thin men to date fat women? Gender really is kind of important here. So think about that social hierarchy again. And when we think about gender, where do men and women fall on that hierarchy? I mean, I think we all know women are literally devalued. Like we literally earn less money for the same work than a man does. I mean, that is like the literal definition of devalued. We are also devalued in ways other than just currency. We are devalued in terms of human rights. I mean, if we talk about, the big topic right now, abortion. Look, we already have bodily autonomy laws in our nation, but this whole thing about abortion is saying, oh yeah, except for women, except for you don't count as human with regard to bodily autonomy laws. Like, it's okay to say, I don't want to give blood to somebody who needs it, but you must be forced to stay pregnant and carry an entire other human. See what I mean? Right? So men are at the top of this social hierarchy and women are lower down. So how is it that women receive social value? Well, some of it is through having babies, but a big old bunch of it is through appearance. And what I mean by appearance is appearance that conforms to the kind of social capital that gives men power. So here's the additional problem with a fat woman and a thin man. She is not giving the currency that she is expected to give to that relationship by being fat. She is not giving the thing that we expect for women to give, which is that somebody looks at that man and that woman and they think, he did good. He did good. Right? So again, you might be thinking, well, I don't think that way. And not everybody thinks that way. Of course not. And, if you don't think that way, bravo. I do want to just challenge that for a moment, though, because I think all of us think that way unconsciously because it's part of the social script we were given. It is possible to override the social script, but we have to do it consciously. Yeah? So ask yourself, why does it happen more frequently that a man who is not considered attractive is able to date a woman who is out of his league up, right, considered super attractive, whereas that doesn't happen quite as often the other way around? Again, it's because men have way more categories from which to draw their social power than just appearance. So oftentimes that would be a man with power or money or perceived intellect or athletic prowess or, whatever the thing might be. Whereas for women, it doesn't sound the same, right? If a man is super attractive and his wife is not, but he says something like, she's not a glamour puss, but my God, she's an amazing astrophysicist. That's considered like not a criteria somehow that he should give one shit about in terms of what kind of social contract they have made regarding marriage or coupledom, right? So it is really significant. Why is it hard for thin men to date fat women? You could argue that it is harder in that configuration than in any other, although certainly thinness is at a premium for all people when they consider dating. It's one of the reasons it's very difficult for fat people to use online dating apps successfully, is because we belong to a category of people that are thought ugly by default. And so you kind of have to meet the person and see where's the possibility that you're not ugly before you even, want to proceed at all, as opposed to, giving somebody the benefit of the doubt based on a little picture and a few texts. All right. There's the answer to that question. Thin men, fat women. Do you have any questions about all that I have just said regarding this topic? And can you think of anywhere you might, want to talk about this with other people that you know as time goes on? Please unmute yourself and speak if that is the case. or sit in silent contemplation, and that'll be okay too. As I mentioned, I think this is going to be a brief episode today, and while you're thinking, let me just also say, if you missed a previous Hope Desk and you think, wow, these are some great topics that we're talking about, most of the previous episodes are available on YouTube now, and I think Emily has given you links for all of my social media and YouTube stuff, and so you can find those if you would like to, previous episodes. I think actually last year at some point I talked about gerrymandering as well.
Kimberly, your YouTube
otherwise they're unique topics.
Kimberly, your YouTube is not included on the list of social medias.
Well, that'd be handy if it were. If you're able to find it to include it, that's great. Right. Anything anyone wants to say before we are done today? So I just want to encourage you to start thinking about where these topics might come up that you can join in conversations. It's also possible for you to start conversations about these things. So think about conversations with family members. If you have children, for instance, think about when you are watching television, what kind of topics might come up regarding thin and fat people, for example. This is true with family members, but also let's say you're with friends. My goodness, the dating topic, the marriage topic is likely to come up. If you are in the workplace, it might be that people are talking about redistricting. It might be that they don't understand the difference between redistricting and gerrymandering and automatically think redistricting is a political tool. I mean, it is, but not a partisan one. So these are all places that you might join the conversation. And of course, starting a conversation is a little harder, but hey, only a little. You start conversations all the time. So I encourage you to make them meaningful because, folks, we are creating the world even as it creates us. That means you are involved as a cultural creator and you can't give up that job. So if you fail to talk about meaningful things, you are just allowing the culture to be created more of the same. And I would encourage you to start thinking about the world you want to see and actively involve yourself in that. All right. Thank you so much. I will see you all next month.